Our meat hook is a fairly advanced skill, so I do recommend students can shoulder mount, Aisha and aerial invert before they try this. The biggest risk with this one is the exit. If you are not getting out of it with control, you are at significantly higher risk of hurting yourself. So I tend to leave this till a little bit later, even though some people might, in theory, be able to get the trick earlier. They can't exit it, they are not safe, okay? And I have to say right now that personally, I find that this trick is 1,000 times easier on aerial apparatus like your hoop, your silks, your trapeze. I don't know what it is. I think it's possibly the pole being in the way of the body and the position, because obviously on those apparatus you kind of hang below them. I'm not sure. I've got a few different ideas about why that might be. So I tend to teach it a little bit earlier in aerial. Not that I teach aerial very often anymore, but I used to teach it earlier than I do on a pole. So you've got to take responsibility for yourselves when you're training at home. I am not there with you. I cannot keep you safe. So please listen to your body. Okay, so we're just going to start off by talking about our straddle, because we're going to go from a straddle, and if that is not set up well, you're going to really struggle, if not find it impossible. So, two key things. When we're going into our straddle, we want to make sure that we are driving our chest between our arms and that we are dropping our head straight back rather than curling it in to look at our legs, and I'll show you why. So this is what a lot of people do when they straddle, is they're like this kind of a shape. And what we really want is this kind of a shape, where the back is a lot straighter and the hips are higher. This is going to give you a hell of a lot more control in your meat hook as you're going into it. If you're sinking back, you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the upper back muscles. You're not going to be able to use them correctly. It's going to feel harder and you're more likely to fall out of it. I do have a full video on my platform, Practical Pole, that you can watch that will help you with your straddle, and particularly with that element. But the two things to think about is the thrusting of the chest, or the driving of the chest between the arms, and the tipping back of the head immediately. So watch what I do. I'm already thinking about, as I'm pulling down, I'm starting to already think about driving my chest, and I'm going to keep my head back, and this allows me to be here rather than here. Okay, next thing to think about is the arm positioning. In theory on pole, there are 3 different arm positions that we could use. I tend to prefer the middle one. I'm sure different instructors have different opinions on this one. But the first would be a straight arm, fully straight, and although you might be leaning on the pole, you're not like hugging the pole. So this would be more of like a hang. Personally, even if your elbow is not wedged on the pole, you should be pulling through this arm. So never passively hanging. You've still got a slight bend. See, this is like a passive hang. This is a slight bend. It's very subtle, but you want to keep those muscles engaged. Second option is to have a slight elbow hook onto the pole. I actually find this one tends to be easier and more comfortable for me, and it reminds me to keep pulling, because that arm is already slightly bent. So I'm already thinking of pulling down through the arm. And the last option is to really hug the elbow round. So you can see my hand rotates outwards and my elbow really hugs. Now this requires maybe a little bit less strength in the arm, okay? But personally, I don't really like this one. So everybody's different. There's no real right or wrong in pole as long as you're safe. So you're welcome to try the 3 different options and go with what feels right for you. Now, the last thing we need to know before I break down what we're going to do on the pole is the body position. So imagine this is me in my straddle, okay, in the air. So my hips at the moment are kind of square on. They're facing forwards. And what I'm going to do is, as I go into this one, I'm just going to change my position. My hips are going to start to turn in, so they go from facing forwards to turning slightly to the ground. Your bottom hip is going to point down and your top hip is turning into the pole. So we end up this kind of a shape, okay? Head down, hips up, diagonal to the pole. Okay, let's talk left and right. So for me personally, my good side invert is with the pole in my left armpit. But that means for my meat hook that my left arm has to do all of the work. And I'm not gonna lie, my left side is weaker. I do try to be balanced, but it doesn't always work that way. So for me, when I'm doing meat hook, I actually tend to prefer on my invert on my bad side, which is with the pole in my right armpit. So obviously we should always be training both sides. So make sure you're doing that. But it might not be the side you think with this one is what I'm trying to say. Another thing to bear in mind, I'm doing this on static today, so you can see clearly the right angles. If I was on spin, I'd be moving all over the place. However, on static, what tends to happen is as your body moves into position, your hand kind of is pulled around with it. So your grip on your hand isn't necessarily super secure. Versus on spin, once your hand is in place, it is not moving. The pole will move and you will move with it. The hand will not change. So for me personally, although I don't do it on an actual spin very often, I prefer to be on spin pole because my hand feels more secure in this one. It is super hot here in the UK at the moment. We're in a heat wave. I'm sweaty, I'm sticky, I'm gross, I'm slidey. So I'm gonna do my best today, but just bear in mind that my best today is probably gonna be not great. So I'm gonna start off with a pole in my right armpit. Most people consider this to be a left-sided invert, but it doesn't really matter either way. So I'm gonna invert into that straddle, thinking about getting my hips as high as possible, driving my chest forward and dropping my hips back. So now my right leg is the direction my left leg is going to. I'm just going to change my right hand a slight bit so that I now am not too wrapping on the elbow. I'm going to start to take that left leg over to the right and I'm pulling my right leg to my face. My left leg goes towards my face without my hips dropping too much. So you don't want to go too far. You've got to stop at the right point when you can still hold it. So don't think like maximum is better. So they're like the lower the legs, the higher the hips, the better, because you might go slightly too far. So right armpit up into the straddle. My legs are going over to the right. So my body's on the left, my legs want to be on the right. So in my straddle, my left leg comes around. I want to stop when I can hold it and take my top hand off. And notice how I start spinning. That's the static pole being an asshole, okay? As soon as I start spinning, I lose all control. It's not fun. Let's do the left side now. So into that straddle. Nice and tall, nice, good straddle. So now my legs are going towards the left. So the left leg, I have to keep pulling it down. Keep it down. If it starts to pop up, you are going to really struggle. My right leg is going to go up behind the pole and come to join. See how my right hip is close to the pole. And this side, I just don't have the grip to take my top hand off. Slidey summer days. Now, when you take the top hand off, this often helps lock this one in place. So sometimes you kind of have to go for it because it gets the weight distribution over enough to lock you. So if we imagine, I'm sort of here, I'm like, oh gosh, okay, oh, sometimes you just got to get it over because that arm coming over locks your hips into the pole a little bit more. So let's do the right side again. Let's see if I can actually hold this one. Doubtful, but let's see. So into your straddle, head back, hips up. I'm just going to change my left hand slightly. So now my left leg, I'm keeping it in and down towards the floor. Right leg goes up and comes around. Keep pulling through your left arm. It's the spin that puts me off on this side. If I was on spin pole, it would be easy. Damn these poles. I could be like a lot of other people in my tutorials and only show you one side. But I have to be an ambassador for training both sides, even if I'm not so great at it myself, even if my bad side is bad, okay? So it goes to show it takes work, it takes practice. It's really about being muscularly balanced, okay? Now the final thing to say is there are technically three leg positions. We can tuck, we can pike, and we can straddle, okay? Let me see if I can show you these. Now, some people find a tuck easier. The problem with a tuck sometimes is that as we tuck, the bum sometimes goes too far back. So just try to be very aware of that potential thing that can happen. So, straddle. Left leg comes around, tuck, top hand off. Okay, now to come out, we haven't spoken about that, so I'll speak about that now. You want to try and get your top hand back on. Pull, tuck your core in and control your legs down. Absolutely, there's lots of other places you can go from your meat hook, but this would be a much longer video if I get into all of that today, so I'm not going to do that. So you've seen my pike, that was my tuck. Let's try a straddle. Hopefully it'll work today. So the leg comes around, I just open my legs a bit, and my top hand comes off. Okay. As always, if you have any questions, hit me up, let me know, put them in the comments, and don't forget to train smarter, not harder.